First I start with the male parts. A pair of the testes are the main male reproductive organs located in the specially developed coelom. Specially developed coelom, what you call is the scrotum, one pair. And that is the main center of producing the sperm by the process of spermatogenesis. You know what is spermatogenesis? The sperm, they are being produced in this generative cells out there, generative layer in the testes, which generates the sperms in that one. And the process, what you call is the gametogenesis, proceeds on. What it is? The gametes, they are haploid in the beginning, that is containing 2 chromosomes when they are formed. So during the process of this gametes, they have to pass from the various stages. First it divides into 2 divides into 4, that is the 2 division, and then out of these four, that is you have 3 different stages of it. The first one is known as multiplication phase, the maturation phase, then the multiplication phase, and the generative phase of it. Different 3 phases you have, and ultimately in the second stage, in the last of the second stage, the haploids are broken down into the meiosis takes place, and the meiosis takes place, and the haploid is changed into single diploid. Diploid is changed into the haploid, and ultimately from the one sperm cell which is produces spermatozoa, 4 spermatozoa. So you see that thousands of these sperms are being produced in this way, these thousands, and they, after the complete maturation, they pass through the testes into the specially part of the testes around this is a sort of a cap called the epididymis. Through the epididymis into the vas deferens or sperm duct. From both the sides they ascend upward and then move downward. Both of these two join together and they form a common chamber called the urethra, which goes further, elongates and opens into a muscular structure, cellular muscular structure called the penis. Now, there are 3 sets of associated glands which are connected with the production of the various hormones during the movement of the sperm from this. In the beginning, it comes into the one pair of the sperm, seminal vesicle, one pair of these glands around this, in the beginning of the urethra, seminal vesicle, where it is removed, the pH is changed out there from acid to the basic. The acidity is removed from it, and partly it is stored, and the sperm is known as the semen now. Then it moves downward and joins the further in the move downward, and then it forms the this form a narrow tube out there of the urethra associated with the pair of gland prostate, and then bulbourethral gland downward, and both of these, they give the male hormone, the testosterone, and ultimately they pass out from the body, from the penis at the time of the fertilization. This is a very short description of your main male reproductive organ. And now I'm comparing with that of the botany. In the sea, in the nature, exactly the same thing happens in the case of your plants. The male flower, the stamen are the male part of it. Stamen are the male part. I'm giving both together a comparative account. Although it's not mentioned in your book, you should know, but you should know about that study. The pollen grains which are produced by the process of the microsporogenesis or the microspore, that is your pollen grain. How are they formed? If you see the pollen, the upper part of the stamen is known as the pollen. I am giving a very short account. If you cut a cross section, you have various layers around which the outer is the protective layer, ectoderm you call it, and then you have the mother generative cells, and then the generative cells, they form the spore mother cell one. When enlarges out of the, all of them look like this, but one of them becomes bigger and form the spore mother cell. Out of this spore mother cell, it divides exactly same like your gametogenesis. In this it is known in male, in the case of the human body, it is known as the gametogenesis. Here it is known as spore formation, the sporogenesis. These spores are formed, and then they are diploid exactly the same, and then ultimately during this, the three layers are formed. The tapetum is another layer, protective layer of the spore mother cells, which provides them the nutrition and the food. And then after this they form the spore mother cell, and which the spore mother cell divides into many tiny spores, and these tiny spores, they develop into the microspore, or what you call the pollen grains. So the process is simultaneously, both in the case of the zoology and the botany, is exactly the same. And ultimately the outer wall of the wall of that your anther lobe ruptures, and at the time of the pollination, these pollen grains, they are discharged. This is a very short account of that, both the structure and the formation of the gamete, both in male and female. Gamete is the unit of your male. Now exactly the same thing you have in the case of the female human body as well as in the female flower. Now in the female, the pair of the testes in the woman, they are located at the back on the lower abdomen, at the back of the woman and the lower abdomen, that is on the dorsal side, one pair. And they open in the funnel shaped structure called the ovidical funnel. But at the time of the discharge of these ova from the ovaries, which are discharged after every 28 days, instead of this sporogenesis, here the oogenesis takes place. O-O-G-E-N-E-S. That is, the ova are formed. The ova is, or the egg cell is formed out here. Now how does it happen? It passes through a process of, exactly like the spermatogenesis, the oogenesis. Same way, it divides into 2 into 4. That is your multiplication, maturation phase, then the growth phase, the growth phase, multiplication phase, and then lastly it is the double maturation phase. Now under these same stages it has to pass, and here it is the haploid oogenesis. The ova, they are produced in the egg cells, they are produced, and one is, after divided into 3, 1:2, 2:4, and then after these 4, then 2 are left, and out of these 2, only we will consider only one in which the meiosis takes place, and here the chromosome number is reduced to half. That is, from diploid it becomes haploid. After these 2, the 2 polar bodies are formed here from it, but one of them again divides the secondary polar bodies. 2 again is formed, and then out of these polar bodies, they are actually consumed for the development of the egg, and out of these only the one egg cell develops. Here you have the change here that in the case of the male, one generative cell gives 4, here it is giving the 1 ovum, and these polar bodies are consumed as well. So this is the difference between the oogenesis and the spermatogenesis. and this is a matured cell and is formed and which is stored in the ovary. Correct? And this is discharged from the ovary after every 28 days. Anyway, and these follicular structure, they pass through this oviducal funnel into the narrow tube called the fallopian tube, the oviduct. Both these, I'm coming to the structure, both the oviduct, they join together to form a muscular chamber called the uterus, where the actual development of the fetus takes place. And then the uterus open outside through the pore vagina, which is protected by the crebex, the muscles of the crebex. This is the very simple description of the female reproductive organ. Now exactly the same, I come back to the carpel, that is plant. In the case of the plant, you have the carpel, that is the female structure. Here the formation, the oogenesis is known as the formation of the development of the gametophyte, the development of the female gametophyte, that is the ovule, which consists of your eggs, which is formed in the beginning in the female. The spore mother cell gave rise to the eggs, the generative cell gave rise to the mother. And then same thing, it divides and forms the one or single cell structure called the embryo sac. Out of the one single nucleus divided into 3 times. First 1 is to 2, is divided into 2, 2 after 2 is to 4, and then after it is into 8 cell. And that is the largest cell in that one, and this form the embryonic chamber or the embryo sac. Out of these 8, the first division gives 2, the second division gives out of these 4, and the third division gives the 8. Out of these 8 cells in the embryo sac, the 2 on the anterior side form the antipodals, 3 antipodals. In the center, there is the 2 cells are formed, joined together, is known as the axon. The secondary nucleus of the polar body. And then down below, there is a main out of these 3. 3 is consumed, 2 is consumed, 5 and the 3 left down below in the ventral side towards the micropylar end is known as the egg and the 2 synergids. 3 antipodals and 2 synergids. So altogether, all of these 5 nuclei, they are consumed. And this is covered by the mass called the nucleus and protected by the 2 layers called the integument, which joins downward towards and open through a tiny pore called the micropyle, and that is attached with the chalaza in the ovule. The whole of the structure is known ovule, and that ovule gives rise to the after fertilization gives rise to the seed. So this is how we exactly the same like in oogenesis in the human body. Here is the development of the gametophyte or megasporogenesis, called the megasporogenesis. Microsporogenesis is the pollen grain formation, and megasporogenesis is the ovule formation. This is how the ovule is formed. So I have given you a very simple outline of the comparative account of the male and the female parts of the reproductive parts of the plants as well as the human body. So further division is your reproduction in both. In the case of the human body, it passes in the various stages, like your first is your oogenesis, various stages. After spermatogenesis in the male, spermatogenesis, then the gametogenesis, and then after gametogenesis you have the fertilization. After fertilization, you have the implantation. After implantation, blastulation, gastrulation, and then the attachment of that blastula with the uterus wall. That is in the uterus wall. Then this is after the fertilization, the oviduct, and that is known as the attachment of this is known as the implantation, and the implant is done through the placentation, and the placentation, then you have the gestation, that is the development and nutrition with the 3-layer protective bodies and the 3-layer formation, the ectoderm, mesoderm and the endoderm, which give rise to the various parts, and ultimately the parturition, that is the birth of the child. So it completely takes about 9 months for the complete development, and these parts what I mentioned about you, they have the various function during the development of the embryo. This is how the fertilization takes place in the human. Exactly the same in the case of the plants. In the case of the plants, the pollination first. After the pollination, the pollen tube formation, and in the pollination, the microbe, there is one single cell called the gamete cell, and this gamete cell divides into two. One is vegetative, and the second is your vegetative and the generative cell. The vegetative cell, which is covered by these two layers, exine and antine. The exine bursts over the stigma, and the antine enlarges downward and forms one generative cell, and the vegetative cell is consumed out there, and this generative cell divides into two male gametes, and which passes down through the micropyle and through the micro. And this, in the micropyle, these two male gametes, one of the male gametes enters, fuses with the egg cell nuclei. This is called the actual fertilization. And the other male gamete passes through the side of the male and fuses with the secondary nucleus, that we call it the triple fertilization or the double. Why it is known as the triple? Because as we have seen that in the polar body they contain two nuclei. So one more is fused together, and then it is formed two. And or the second type of the second time the fusion takes place, that is also known as the secondary fertilization. So this is how the fertilization takes place. The egg cell develop, ultimately the egg cell develop into the seed, and the case of the monocot, this secondary nucleus develops into the endosperm, and this is how the seed is formed. So you have the bifurcation of the single two cotyledon form is a dicotyledonous seed, and only one cotyledon is formed, is the monocot. This is the outline of your plant, and exactly like that, or you can. It's a very close comparison account between zoology and the botany during the male and the female parts and the reproduction. That is all that you have to do for the reproduction. Personally, yes.